Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something we all encounter constantly: food labels. It's that wall of information in the grocery store that can feel more like a secret code than, a guide to healthy eating.
Oh, absolutely. It can certainly feel like you need a decoder ring just to figure out what you're actually buying sometimes.
Exactly. And for our listener today, the goal is pretty simple: to get a clear and, well, quick understanding of what really matters on those labels without getting totally lost in the fine print.
Right.
Think of this as your, express lane to becoming a savvy food shopper.
And then our mission here is to pull out the most important advice from the experts. We're talking registered dietitians, looking at regulatory perspectives so you can navigate those grocery aisles with a bit more confidence.
Yeah, and sidestep some of the clever ways manufacturers try to, well, influence your choices.
Definitely.
So let's jump right into our first potential pitfall: added sugars. It's not always as obvious as just seeing the word sugar in bold letters, is it?
That's so true. Food companies have become, well, masters of disguise when it comes to added sugars. Just because you don't see cane sugar right there doesn't mean the product is free of added sweeteners.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. What are some of the less obvious names for added sugar that we should be watching out for?
Well, you need to think about things like date syrup, molasses, even brown rice syrup. High fructose corn syrup is another major one.
Right, HFCS. I hear a lot about that one.
Yeah, and Ryan Geiger points out that observational studies have pretty consistently shown a link, a correlation, between higher intakes of high fructose corn syrup and increased risk factors for things like type 2 diabetes and heart disease.
Okay.
Now, more research is always ongoing into the exact mechanisms, but it's definitely something to be mindful of. They're really skilled at making these sugars less conspicuous on the label.
So how do we become better detectives then? How do we uncover these hidden sugars when we're looking at a food label?
The nutrition facts panel is your key piece of evidence here. You need to look for the line that specifically says includes XG added sugar.
Uh,
You'll usually find it indented right under total carbohydrates. That's the number. That tells you the amount of sugars that were added during processing, not the ones naturally present.
Got it. So that's the direct count of the added stuff. Now, Amy Davis offers a general target, doesn't she? What's sort of a reasonable amount to aim for per serving?
She suggests aiming for under 10 grams of added sugar per serving in a product. Of course, individual dietary needs can vary quite a bit, but that provides a helpful general guideline for most people.
Okay, this already feels more manageable. Just one clear action. Check that specific added sugar line.
Exactly.
All right, moving on. The front of the package. That's often where the marketing magic happens, right? And it can be a bit of a minefield of, well, let's call them overly enthusiastic claims.
Oh, for sure. Vague marketing claims designed to catch our eye.
Yeah.
The front, the sides, even the back sometimes can be covered in statements that sound really appealing, but often don't have a lot of solid nutritional backing behind them.
Like, what kind of claims should make us, raise our eyebrows a bit?
Well, you'll see things like light or kid approved, maybe made with real fruit. They sound great on the surface,
Uh-huh.
but as both Amy Davis and Ryan Geiger point out, these are often just marketing buzzwords. They're not really supported by rigorous evidence or, scientific studies.
Kid approved. That one always makes me wonder, does that mean one single child somewhere gave it a thumbs up? Is that the standard?
Precisely. As Geiger kind of humorously suggests, one child's fleeting preference can somehow end up being a major selling point right there on the packaging.
Wow.
It really tells you nothing meaningful about the actual nutritional quality of the food inside.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Just realizing how many of these claims might be completely without substance. Okay, another crucial element to watch: sodium content. We know our bodies need some sodium, but it seems like most of us are getting far, far more than necessary.
That's absolutely correct. While our minimum requirement for sodium is actually quite low, maybe around 500 milligrams a day,
Right.
the average American consumes upwards of 3,000 milligrams daily, sometimes even more.
Yikes, that's a huge difference. So where do we find the sodium information, and what's a level that should make us pause?
It's clearly listed on the nutrition facts panel, both in milligrams and usually as a percentage of your daily intake. Now, that percentage is based on a standard 2,000 calorie diet.
Okay.
But the general recommendation for most adults is actually to keep their total sodium intake below 2,300 milligrams per day, regardless of their calorie intake.
Right, that 2,300 number. So what's like a red flag percentage to look out for when we're just glancing at that label?
Ryan Geiger suggests being pretty cautious about products that have over 20% of your daily sodium allowance in a single serving.
20%. Okay.
That translates to about 460 milligrams. Especially if you have any concerns about your heart health, hitting that level in just one serving can really quickly push you over your daily limit.
Okay, another quick visual cue then. That's helpful. Next up, artificial ingredients. This feels like a really broad category of
It
things.
is quite broad, yeah. It basically encompasses additives, preservatives, artificial colors, artificial flavors, and artificial sweeteners, a whole range.
And the general guidance here is basically try to avoid them when you can. Is that the gist?
That's the recommendation from Amy Davis, generally speaking. The long-term effects of some of these artificial ingredients aren't fully understood yet.
Mm-hmm.
And with more natural alternatives often available these days, it's generally wise to choose those when possible.
Are there any specific examples of like potential downsides to these artificial ingredients that we should know about?
Well, Alyssa Smolin highlights hidden sugar alcohols. These are sugar substitutes that aren't fully digested by the body.
Okay.
And for some people, these can cause pretty significant gastrointestinal issues, bloating, gas, that sort of thing. So it's definitely worth taking a good look at that ingredients list for them.
Right. So if that list looks more like a science experiment than a recipe,
Mm.
that might be a signal to pause.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
No, natural claims. This one feels particularly deceptive because it just sounds so inherently good for you, doesn't it?
It really does. And it's often one of the most misleading terms on food packaging because people tend to automatically associate natural with things like organic or inherently healthy or unprocessed.
But the reality, as we seem to be finding with food labels, is usually a bit more complicated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The FDA's actual definition of natural is surprisingly narrow. According to Ryan Geiger, it primarily just means the product doesn't contain any added artificial colors or artificial flavors.
That's it.
Pretty much. It doesn't tell you anything about whether pesticides were used in growing the ingredients, the level of processing the food underwent, or its overall nutritional value. In many cases, it's really just another marketing tactic.
Wow. So just because a product shouts natural from the rooftops doesn't really give it a free pass on our shopping cart.
Not at all.
Okay, let's move on to trans fats. We generally know these are considered bad news for our cardiovascular health, right?
They certainly are. Trans fats are typically man-made fats. They're created through a process called hydrogenation to extend the shelf life and improve the texture, the mouthfeel, of processed foods.
Right.
Unfortunately, they have a pretty negative impact on our cholesterol levels. They tend to raise the LDL, that's the bad cholesterol, and lower the HDL, the good cholesterol. They've also been linked to increased inflammation and impaired glucose tolerance. Basically, not great stuff.
And they can be a bit sneaky on the label too, can't they? I seem to recall something about a loophole that allows them to be listed as 0.
Yes, that's a key point. Food companies are actually allowed to claim 0 grams of trans fat on the nutrition label if a single serving contains 0.5 grams or less.
Half a gram or less.
Right. And while that might seem like a tiny amount, the recommended upper limit for trans fat intake is very low, generally less than 1% of your total daily calories.
Okay.
On a 2,000-calorie diet, that's only around 2.2 grams per day. So if you're eating multiple servings of different products that each contain just under 0.5 grams, those small amounts can really add up quickly without you realizing it.
So how do we really know if trans fats are hiding in a product, even if the label says 0 grams? What's the giveaway?
The key is to always check the ingredients list. You need to look for the phrase hydrogenated oil or partially hydrogenated oil.
Ah, okay. Hydrogenated.
If you see either of those listed anywhere in the ingredients, the product contains trans fats, even if the nutrition facts panel states 0 grams per serving. That's the telltale sign.
Good practical tip. Always scan that ingredient list for hydrogenated. Got it. Now let's talk about fiber. We constantly hear about the importance of getting enough fiber. How does the food label help us figure out a product's fiber content?
Absolutely. Dietary fiber is super important. It's crucial for a healthy gut microbiome, heart health, metabolic function, good digestion. The list goes on.
Right.
As a general rule of thumb, if you're looking at a carbohydrate-containing food like bread, cereal, crackers, and have less than, say, 5 grams of fiber per serving, it's probably worth looking around for a higher fiber alternative if one exists.
Okay, less than 5 grams is sort of a benchmark to keep in mind for those types of foods. Why that number specifically?
Well, Alyssa Smolin points out that a low fiber content especially below that 5-gram mark for grain-based products,
Mm.
often indicates that the food hasn't retained much of its natural fiber during processing.
Ah.
So it means that food probably won't contribute significantly to your daily fiber needs, which, let's be honest, many people already struggle to meet. A quick tip is often to look for products labeled whole grain, as they usually contain more fiber.
That makes sense. Look for whole grains. Okay, next up, non-compliance with FDA regulations. Now, this sounds like something that should immediately raise a pretty big red flag about the reliability of the entire label, right?
It absolutely should, yeah. If a food label isn't adhering to the basic rules set by the FDA, it really raises serious questions about the accuracy and trustworthiness of all the information presented on that package. That's according to Amy Davis.
So, what are some specific signs of this non-compliance that we, as consumers, can actually spot? Are there obvious things?
Yeah, there can be. Keep an eye out for things like the calorie count not being listed in the required increments of 10, especially over 50 calories, or inconsistencies in how allergens are disclosed. For example, as Alyssa Smolin notes, a product might clearly label that it contains dairy, but then fail to mention the presence of eggs, even though both are major allergens that should be listed if present.
Ah, so it's like if they're not being careful with the obvious rules, what other important details might they be overlooking or even misrepresenting?
Exactly that. In cases like that where you see some sloppiness or inconsistency, it's always a really good idea to double-check the ingredient list extra carefully for any potential allergens, even if the main allergen statement on the label seems incomplete or just off somehow.
This is really empowering, giving us concrete things to look for that could signal a potentially unreliable label overall.
Yeah, it helps you be a bit more critical.
Let's revisit those front of package claims.
Yeah.
We touched on them earlier, but considering insights from, say, the Price Pottinger article, it sounds like there's even more to unpack there.
Yes, definitely. The Price Pottinger article really emphasizes that these front-of-package claims are often designed much more to attract your attention and create a positive feeling
Right, the allure.
than to provide comprehensive, accurate nutritional information. While the FDA does require the common or usual name of the food to be displayed prominently on the front,
Okay.
that's often where the truly regulated information kind of ends on that front panel.
And for really basic fundamental foods like, say, milk, there are specific standards of identity, aren't there? Like rules about what you can call milk.
That's right. To be labeled simply milked, a product has to meet a very precise minimum percentage of milk fat. If it doesn't meet that standard, it needs a more descriptive name, like skim milk or 1% milk, clearly indicating how it's been altered from the standard.
But for foods that don't have these strict standards, it seems like manufacturers have a lot more, well, flexibility in their naming and claim.
Precisely. Names like reduced fat sour cream or sugar-free cookies do indicate that changes have been made, sure. But the article highlights that these alterations can sometimes involve adding less desirable ingredients, think synthetic fat substitutes or artificial sweeteners, to try and maintain the taste and texture people expect.
Right, replacing one thing with potentially something else questionable. And what about those really enticing claims like 100% real beef or made with real fruit? What's the real story behind those?
Well, the FDA permits these claims as long as the named ingredient is actually present in the product somewhere.
Okay.
However, as the article points out, meatballs labeled 100% real beef can still legally contain things like fillers and binders, and cookies claiming to be made with real fruit might contain only a tiny minimal amount of actual fruit alongside a whole lot of sugar and maybe artificial ingredients. The real fruit might just be a sprinkle.
Wow, okay. And what about claims related to whole grains? Those sound like a healthy choice, but are they always what they seem?
You definitely need to be cautious there too.
Hmm.
A product claiming to be made with whole wheat, or maybe boasting that it contains 2 grams of whole grains per serving, can still have refined white flour as its primary, most abundant ingredient. This is especially true if it's not a standardized product like, say, whole wheat bread, which has its own specific regulations about the amount of whole grain required.
That's definitely something to be aware of. And the article also mentions a potentially misleading tactic involving putting only a partial ingredient list on the front of the package.
Yes, that's a clever one. Some companies will strategically place what looks like a short, simple ingredient list right on the front of the packaging. They'll highlight maybe a few good or appealing ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
However, the complete and official ingredient list, which might reveal a less favorable overall composition with lots of other stuff, is usually located somewhere else, often below the nutrition facts panel on a separate side or back panel. You have to hunt for it.
Sneaky. And what about allergy information on the front? It's helpful when it's there, obviously, but
Thought.
we shouldn't rely on it exclusively.
Exactly. While some manufacturers do voluntarily include allergy warnings like contains wheat and soy on the front for quick reference, it is not a legal requirement to put it there.
Okay.
To get the full and accurate picture of potential allergens, you always need to carefully check the complete ingredient list. That's the definitive source.
It seems the one front-of-package claim that does have a clear and standardized definition, at least, is gluten-free.
That's correct. The FDA has established a specific standard for that claim. To be legally labeled gluten-free, a product must contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten. So that one does have a strict meaning.
Okay, so the front of the package is often more about marketing, maybe some basic ID. The real information, the nitty-gritty details, are hiding in that ingredient list. Let's dig deeper into how to effectively read that, again, drawing on insights from Price Pottinger.
Absolutely. The article really underscores this point. Meticulously reading the ingredient list is truly the most reliable way to understand exactly what you're putting into your body.
Right.
And the fundamental principle to remember is that ingredients are listed in descending order by weight. So the ingredient that weighs the most is listed first, down to the ingredient that weighs the least, listed last.
So the first few ingredients listed really make up the bulk of the product?
Precisely. And the article points out that even within the ingredient list, some ingredients might have names that kind of obscure their highly processed nature. For example, just seeing the word milk
Mm-hmm.
could refer to various forms, including things like dried milk powder or maybe reconstituted milk solids, not necessarily fresh liquid milk. The same logic applies to eggs. It could be fresh eggs or it could be processed egg products.
And those natural foods we talked about earlier might use different terminology for ingredients we're actually already familiar with, just under a different name.
Exactly. You might see cane sugar or beet sugar listed in a product that's marketed as natural.
Mm.
But from a nutritional standpoint, the FDA considers these virtually identical to plain old refined white sugar. Similarly, seeing wheat flour or unbleached white flour listed often just means ordinary refined white flour, not whole wheat flour.
What about the term natural flavors? I've heard that can be a bit of a catch-all term, sort of vague.
Historically, that has definitely been the case. For instance, monosodium glutamate, or MSG, was sometimes kind of hidden under the umbrella term natural flavor or flavoring.
Right.
However, current FDA regulations generally require most protein hydrolysates, which are a common source of free glutamate that gives that MSG effect, to be listed individually by their specific name.
Okay.
Although there's still a bit of an exception for certain meat products, which are regulated differently by the USDA, not the FDA. So it's mostly listed now, but maybe not always.
Interesting. And what about when you see a list of oils, like vegetable oils with and/or written in between the names, like contains soybean and/or canola oil?
Right. That typically indicates that the manufacturer is basically using whichever of the listed oils, common ones are cottonseed oil, soybean oil, or canola oil is the most cost-effective, the cheapest at the time of production.
Ah, so they can swap them out.
Yeah, and these oils are usually highly refined and, quite frequently, derived from genetically engineered crops.
Okay. The article also briefly touches on genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. We don't have mandatory labeling everywhere yet, but there might be some clues in the ingredient list itself.
Yes, while direct, explicit GMO labeling isn't universally required in the U.S. yet,
Right.
if a food's nutritional profile has been significantly altered through genetic modification, that change must be reflected in its common or usual name on the ingredient list. For example, you might see something like high oleic acid soybean oil.
Okay.
That phrasing suggests the soybeans have likely been genetically modified to produce a higher level of oleic acid than conventional soybeans. So the name change can be a hint.
That little phrase at the very end of the ingredient list
Yeah.
contains less than 2% of the following. All those little things at the end. Those ingredients are in such small amounts they probably don't matter much individually, right?
Right. Well, not necessarily. While each individual ingredient listed in that less than 2% section is present in a relatively small quantity by weight,
Mm-hmm.
cumulatively, when you add them all up, they can actually represent a pretty significant portion of the product's overall composition, especially in highly processed foods. So don't dismiss that section entirely.
Good point. And are there any ingredients that don't even have to be listed on the label at all, like completely hidden?
Yes, there are certain things called incidental or indirect additives. These are often trace amounts of substances that might end up in the food during processing, maybe from packaging materials or as components of other ingredients.
Okay.
And these are often exempt from being listed on the label, especially in very heavily processed foods. So there can be things in there you literally cannot see on the list.
So as a general rule of thumb then, would you say a longer ingredient list usually indicates a higher level of processing?
That's generally a very good rule of thumb, yes. More ingredients overall, and particularly a longer list filled with less recognizable, more chemical-sounding ingredients, typically suggest a greater degree of industrial processing has occurred.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift our focus now to serving sizes. This feels like another area where we can easily be misled, right? Based on info from places like Healthline and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, ADA.
Absolutely. This is a huge one. The serving sizes presented on food labels are often considerably smaller, sometimes ridiculously smaller, than what the average person actually consumes in a single sitting.
Can you give some common examples of these potentially misleading serving sizes? What should we look out for?
Oh, think about a serving size listed as half a can of soda, or maybe a quarter of a large cookie, or half of a small candy bar.
Right, nobody eats half a small candy bar.
Exactly. For many people, these just represent unrealistic portions. It's not how people actually eat these foods.
And what's the impact of using these artificially small serving sizes on the nutritional information we see on the panel?
Well, it allows the manufacturers to present the calorie count, the sugar content, the fat content per serving as much lower than they would be if the label reflected the more typical consumption amount.
Ah, the numbers look better that way.
Precisely. This can easily lead consumers to believe a food is healthier or contains fewer calories or less sugar than it actually does, based on how much they realistically eat.
So the key takeaway here is that we really need to pay close attention to the listed serving size first, and then honestly consider how much of the product we're actually going to eat in one go.
Exactly. Your very first step when looking at the nutrition facts label should always be to locate the serving size and the number of servings per container,
Okay.
because all the other nutrient information provided on that label, calories, fat, sodium, sugar, is based on that specific serving size amount. If you 2 servings, you absolutely need to double all those numbers. 3 servings, triple them, and so on.
Right, do the math. Okay, now let's try to break down some of the most frequently seen and potentially misleading claims on food packaging, drawing on info from both Healthline and the ADA. We've already touched on natural, but there are so many others that can be confusing.
There certainly are. It's like a whole different language sometimes. For example, the term light, or sometimes LEAT, as Healthline points out, often suggests a reduction in calories or fat compared to the regular version. But it could also simply mean the product has been diluted with water, or maybe they've added sugar to compensate for the reduction in fat to make it taste okay. You have to check.
And multigrain. Sounds healthy.
It sounds great, but it just indicates the presence of more than one type of grain. Those grains are likely refined grains unless the label specifically says 100% whole grain.
Okay. Organic carries a healthy connotation, but as we kind of discussed earlier,
Right, organic doesn't automatically equate to healthy. Organic sugar is still sugar. Organic cookies can still be high in calories, fat, and sodium, just like conventional ones.
and no added sugar.
That doesn't mean the product is low in total sugar. It might naturally contain a significant amount of sugar, like from fruit juice concentrate, or it might include unhealthy sugar substitutes like artificial sweeteners.
What about claims like low calorie and low fat? Do they have strict meanings?
Low calorie does have a specific legal definition. It generally means the product contained 1/3 fewer calories than the standard version of that food.
Okay.
But it's still wise to compare the actual calorie count to other similar products, because the low-calorie version might still be quite high in calories overall. And low-fat products, very commonly, have added sugar or sodium to improve their taste and texture after the fat has been removed.
Ah, the fat sugar seesaw. And those made with whole grains claims how much whole grain are we usually talking about?
It might be a very small percentage, honestly. To get a better idea, you really need to check if a whole grain like whole wheat flour is listed as one of the first, say, 3 ingredients on the ingredient list.
Okay.
Fortified or enriched simply means that certain vitamins or minerals have been added back into the food, usually after they were stripped out during processing. It doesn't make the base product itself inherently healthy.
And gluten-free, very popular these days, but again, doesn't automatically mean it's a healthy choice.
That's absolutely correct. Many processed gluten-free products are actually quite high in refined starches, unhealthy fats, added sugars, and sodium, to make up for the lack of gluten.
Right.
And the term fruit flavored. That almost always indicates the use of artificial flavors designed to taste like fruit, rather than containing any significant amount of actual fruit.
And zero trans fat, as we already covered.
Means less than 0.5 grams per serving, so those small, unrealistic serving sizes can still be really misleading if you eat more than one.
Now, the ADA also provides specific legal definitions for various nutrient content claims, right? It's helpful to know these aren't just random marketing terms, they have rules.
Yes, exactly. The ADA outlines precise amounts for claims like fat-free means less than zero point 0.5 grams of fat per serving. Low sodium means 140 milligrams or less per serving. High fiber means 5 grams or more per serving.
Okay.
And there are similar specific thresholds for claims related to sugar content, like sugar-free, and cholesterol content, like cholesterol-free or low cholesterol. Understanding these official definitions really empowers you to look beyond the catchy phrases on the front.
This really underscores the importance of being a critical reader of the entire label, doesn't it? Not just the enticing words on the front.
Absolutely. You have to look at the whole picture.
And finally, let's address a major point of confusion: sugar. Both Healthline and the ADA really emphasize just how many different names it can go by on an ingredient list. It's not just sugar.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of incredible. Food manufacturers often use a wide variety of different sugar names within a single product.
Why do they do that?
Well, it can make it appear as though no single type of sugar is present in a really high concentration near the top of the ingredient list,
Yep.
even if the total amount of added sugars from all the different types combined is actually very significant.
Oh, okay. Spreading it out down the list. Can you maybe
Mhm.
give us a sense of the scale here? Like a list of some of these aliases that we should be on the lookout for.
The list is quite extensive. You have various types of sugar like beet sugar, brown sugar, cane sugar, castor sugar, coconut sugar, date sugar, golden sugar, invert sugar, muscovado sugar, organic raw sugar, raspadura, evaporated cane juice, confectioner sugar.
Oh, okay.
You have numerous syrups: carob syrup, golden syrup, high fructose corn syrup, honey, agave nectar, malt syrup, maple syrup, oat syrup, rice bran syrup, rice syrup.
Still going?
Oh, yeah. And finally, a whole category of other added sugars, including things like barley malt, molasses, cane juice crystals, lactose, corn sweetener, crystalline fructose, dextrin, malt powder, ethyl maltol, fructose, fruit juice concentrate, galactose, glucose, disaccharides, maltodextrin, maltose. But this isn't even an exhaustive list.
It's like they're speaking a completely different language. So the strategy is basically to really scan that entire ingredient list for any of these terms that sound like sugar or syrup, especially if you notice several different ones appearing throughout the list.
Exactly that. Look for anything ending in S, like glucose, fructose, maltose. Look for syrups. Look for juices or nectars. And it's also important to remember that, as the ADA points out, since January 2021, food labels in the U.S. are now required to separately list the total amount of added sugars in grams and as a percentage of daily value right on the nutrition facts panel.
Ah, right. That added sugar line we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly. That's a significant step towards greater transparency for consumers, making it a bit easier to see the total added amount without having to decipher all those different names. But checking the ingredient list still tells you where those sugars are coming from.
This has been an incredibly enlightening deep dive. Seriously helpful. So, just to quickly recap the key red flags we've discussed today. We've got added sugars lurking under numerous pseudonyms, those often unsubstantiated, vague marketing claims on the front of the package, high sodium content, artificial ingredients like colors, flavors, preservatives, the deceptiveness of that simple word, natural,
Right.
the heart health concerns around trans fats and how to spot them using hydrogenated, low fiber content, especially under 5 grams in some foods, signs that a label might not even be complying with basic FDA regulations.
Yeah, the inconsistencies.
The strategic, sometimes misleading language used right on the front, potentially hidden ingredients with unfamiliar or chemical-sounding names, and of course the absolutely extensive vocabulary of sugar.
And I think the single most crucial takeaway, as highlighted particularly by the Price Pottinger article but echoed by others, is the fundamental power of just taking the time to carefully read the ingredient list.
Yeah.
That's truly where you'll find the most accurate, unvarnished information about what's actually in your food beyond the marketing spin.
So for our listener today and for everyone who tuned in, here's maybe a final thought to chew on. Now that you're armed with a better understanding of these common food label tactics and tricks, think about how this knowledge can empower you to make more informed choices. Choices that go far beyond just a quick glance at the front of the package or the main nutrition numbers.
Hmm.
Like, what other assumptions do we unknowingly make about the food we buy based purely on clever packaging or marketing buzzwords? We really encourage you to take a closer, more critical look at the foods you bring into your home next time you're shopping. Thanks for diving deep with us today.